The Returned. I grew up in a town that was small enough for rumors to travel fast, but large enough that no one ever admitted believing them. We weren't the kind of place where things happened. No cults, no serial killers, no famous tragedies. Just long winters, 2 grocery stores, and people who had known each other for decades. And sometimes, someone who left and came back different. No one called them ghosts. No one said they were possessed. We had a name for them that sounded almost respectful. We called them the Returned. It didn't happen often, maybe once every few years, sometimes longer. But when it did, everyone knew within a day. A person would disappear, not dramatically. No broken doors, no blood, no screams, just gone. A husband who didn't come home from work, a teenager who never made it back from a walk, a man who drove to the hardware store and never arrived. Search parties would form. Posters would go up. People would check the riverbanks, the woods, the old industrial lots near the highway. And then, usually 2 or 3 days later, they would come back. Alive. Walking. Calm. I remember the first time I heard about it. I was maybe 12. My grandmother was in the kitchen, cutting bread with that slow, careful motion she used when she was thinking. She said it like it was weather. They brought him back. I asked who. She said, no one brings them back. They just come. It was a man she had known after the war. Her friend's fiancé, declared dead overseas. Letter from the military. Official seal. Folded flag. And then, almost a year later, he walked into town one evening. No explanation. No wounds. No emotion. They didn't ask him where he had been, my grandmother told me. They learned not to. That was the first rule. You don't ask. I didn't understand what that meant until years later, when it happened to someone I actually knew. The Carter family lived 3 streets over from us. Mark Carter worked construction. His wife, Elena, taught at the elementary school. They weren't dramatic people. They didn't fight in public. They didn't gossip. They just existed the way most families in that town did. One Tuesday, Mark didn't come home. His truck was found parked near the old water tower. Doors locked. Keys inside. No signs of struggle. Search parties went out. The whole town buzzed for 3 days. And then, on the 4th night, he walked through his own front door. No one saw him arrive. He didn't call. He didn't knock. Elena said she heard the front door open, and he was just there, standing in the hallway, like he had just come back from work. He wasn't injured, not dirty, not confused, just quiet. When she asked him where he had been, he looked at her for a long time and said, "It was quiet." That was it. The next day, he went to work. He moved normally, spoke normally, even smiled once or twice. If you didn't look too long, you wouldn't notice anything. But people did look, and that's when they started to see it. He didn't blink as often, not dramatically, just enough that it felt wrong. He held eye contact too steadily, and at night, he didn't sleep. Elena told my mother first. She said she would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and he wouldn't be in bed. She would find him sitting at the kitchen table, lights off, hands folded, just sitting there. When she asked what he was doing, he said, "Waiting." "Waiting for what?" she asked. He tilted his head slightly. "As long as I don't sleep, nothing changes." She laughed when she told the story the first time, like it was stress, like he was traumatized. But after 2 weeks, she stopped laughing. Because he never slept. Not once. Not even by accident. She tested it, stayed awake one night to watch him. He didn't close his eyes, didn't yawn, didn't shift in his seat. He just sat there, perfectly still. And at around 4 a.m, she said he began whispering. Not loudly, not clearly, but consistently, like he was reciting something. When she asked him about it in the morning, he said, "I was practicing." She didn't ask what. That's when people in town started using the word again, quietly. The returned. I didn't believe it at first, not fully. People exaggerate, especially in towns like that. Silence turns into mystery. Mystery turns into folklore. But then I saw him myself. Elena didn't invite me. She didn't ask for help. My mother told me she wasn't sleeping anymore. Not because of him, because she was afraid to. I went over on a Sunday afternoon. Bright day. Neighbors outside. Kids riding bikes. Everything normal. Mark opened the door. He looked exactly the same. Same posture, same haircut, same voice. He even smiled, but it was delayed, like he waited half a second too long before deciding it was appropriate. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight through the window, coffee between us. He held the mug, never drank from it. I asked how he was feeling. He repeated the question first. "How am I feeling?" Then nodded. "Stable." Stable. Not good. Not tired. Not confused. Stable. I asked if he remembered what happened. He looked at the wall behind me, not past me, through me. "I remember being somewhere quiet," he said. "No weather. No sound. No interruptions." I asked if he was alone. He paused longer than before, then said, "I wasn't required to interact." That word stayed with me. Required. When I asked who had required him not to interact, he didn't respond. He blinked once. Slow. Deliberate. And then changed the subject. Elena told me later that if you pushed him too far, he didn't get angry. He just stopped answering. Completely. Would stare at a fixed point until you dropped the question. The not sleeping got worse, or maybe it became more noticeable, because it wasn't just that he stayed awake, it was what he did while awake. He moved through the house at night, not loudly, not randomly. He checked doors, checked windows, stood in hallways, as if confirming the layout hadn't changed. One night, Elena pretended to be asleep. She watched him from the corner of her eye. At exactly 3:17 a.m., he stood up from the kitchen table, walked to the living room, and positioned himself in front of the mirror. Not looking at himself, looking slightly to the side, like he was comparing angles. Then he said something she never told anyone else directly, She told my mother. My mother told me. He said, "It's easier when I rehearse." After that, things shifted. The dog stopped going near him, would growl softly even when Mark was sitting still. The neighbors stopped dropping by, not because of rumors, because of the way he watched them. He didn't look curious. He looked observant, measured, like he was gathering information instead of participating. 3 months passed. He never missed work, never caused a scene, never broke anything. But Elena left. Not dramatically. She packed while he was at work, moved in with her sister 2 towns over, left a note. He didn't try to stop her, didn't call, didn't ask why. He continued going to work, continued not sleeping, continued sitting at that table at night. That's when people started talking more openly. Not loudly, but openly. Because this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. There had been others. A mechanic in the late 80s, a college girl in the mid-90s, a widower who disappeared for a week and came back, thinner, quieter, distant. The pattern was always the same: gone, back, functional, incorrect. My grandmother once told me something else, something she hadn't said when I was 12. The man who came back after the war, he got married, had children, worked for years, seemed normal, until one winter, his wife woke up at night and found him standing at the foot of the bed, watching her breathe. She asked what he was doing. He answered, making sure I still respond. She left within the month. The returned don't hurt anyone, not physically. They don't attack. They don't scream. They don't threaten. They just exist slightly outside of something, and living next to that becomes unbearable. The last time I saw Mark was about 6 months after he came back. He was alone by then, house quiet, curtains drawn. I asked him one final question. I shouldn't have, but I did. "Do you ever feel tired?" He looked at me, longer than necessary, and said, "I think I used to." Then he added, "If I sleep, it resets." I didn't ask what that meant. 2 weeks later, he disappeared again. This time, no search parties formed, no posters, no town meetings. Because everyone already knew what would happen if he came back again. And some people didn't want to find out if he would.
Some stories stay local, others get buried. What you're about to hear isn't a rumor. It's a classified police report that was rewritten and locked away.
This report was never meant to be public. I know that because I watched it get rewritten 3 times. And then disappear. What you're hearing now is not the official version. It's what was left after everything unnecessary was removed, including the parts that explained why none of us wanted to respond to that address ever again. Case ID 2011-447. B-type, welfare check/disturbance. Location, County Road. 9, outskirts responding units. 2 patrol cars. Time, 2:17 a.m. The call itself wasn't unusual. A neighbor reported lights turning on and off in an abandoned property. No registered occupants, no recent utility usage, just movement. I was the senior officer on duty that night. That's why my name is still on the report, even though most of the content isn't. We arrived at 231. The house was exactly where the caller said it would be. Set back from the road. Long driveway. No other structures nearby. What stood out immediately was that the lights were on. All of them. Every room. From what we could tell from the outside. That didn't match the property records. There were no vehicles. No footprints. No noise. Just a fully lit house that hadn't been lived in for years. We followed protocol. Knocked. Announced ourselves. Waited. No response. The front door was unlocked. That detail was removed in the final version of the report. Instead, it says, "Entry gained without force." That's technically true, but it avoids the question of why the door was unlocked in the first place. Inside, the house was clean. Not abandoned clean, maintained clean. No dust, no mold, no signs of squatters, but also no personal belongings, no photos, no clothes, no food. It looked like a house prepared to be occupied, not lived in. We split up. Standard sweep. Room by room. Nothing unusual until we reached the hallway. That's where the time discrepancies start. According to our body cams, we entered the hallway at 2:36. According to the dispatch logs, we didn't call in again until 2:58. That gap was never explained. In the hallway, there was a door at the end. It wasn't marked on the floor plan. We checked the original blueprints later. There shouldn't have been a room there. The door was closed. I don't remember deciding to open it. I remember it being open. The room inside was empty. No furniture, no windows, no lights. But the light switch worked. When we turned it on, the room was already illuminated, as if the light had never been off. That's where the first inconsistency was noted. One of the officers said the room felt occupied, not in the sense of someone being present, in the sense of something having just left. There were marks on the floor, not footprints, not drag marks. They looked like impressions where weight had been placed repeatedly, always in the same spots. The official report calls them structural irregularities. That wasn't my wording. When we exited the room, the hallway felt longer. That sounds subjective, but the body cam footage confirms it took us longer to walk back than it did to enter. At 2:58, we radioed dispatch. That's the first timestamp that survived. What didn't survive was the content of that transmission. It was replaced with "Scene secure. Continuing investigation." We never cleared the scene. We left because we were instructed to. At 3:12, we received a direct order to exit the property. No explanation. No supervisor on scene. Just a voice on the radio that didn't identify itself. By the time we stepped outside, the lights in the house were off. All of them. At once. The neighbor who made the call later denied ever contacting the police. There is no record of the original call in the system anymore. 2 weeks later, I was asked to revise the report. 3 months after that, I was told it never existed. The house was demolished the following year. No notice, no public record. I kept a copy of the original report. Not the full one, just the parts that didn't make sense to remove. Because reports don't get buried unless they describe something that doesn't fit. And whatever was in that house wasn't violent. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't leave evidence of a crime. It left evidence of presence, and that was apparently worse. We found him in the back room, not hiding, not restrained, sitting on the floor, back against the wall, hands resting on his knees. At first glance, he looked human enough. Male, middle-aged, clothes that didn't belong in that house, but also didn't look stolen. What made it difficult to look at him wasn't how he appeared. It was how little he reacted. I announced myself. He didn't turn his head. One of the other officers stepped closer. That's when we noticed the first inconsistency. His eyes moved before the sound reached him. Not fast. Early. As if he had been waiting for it. We checked for weapons. None. We checked for restraints. Signs of injury. Blood. Nothing fresh. But his body didn't behave the way it should have. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Long pauses between breaths. Not gasping. Not struggling. Measured. I asked him his name. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, it wasn't delayed. It was precise, like he had waited for the question to finish forming. He gave a full name. First, middle, last. The name meant nothing to us at the time. When we asked how long he'd been there, he said, "Longer than this building has been useful." That line was not written in the official report. It was replaced with, "Subject gave unclear responses." The strangest part wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't react to. I raised my voice. No response. One officer chambered around. No response. Flashlight directly in his eyes. Minimal pupil movement. When we asked him to stand, he did. But his balance was wrong. Not unsteady. Too stable. His feet planted, as if he had already calculated where they needed to be. When we placed handcuffs on him, he didn't resist. But he corrected the position of his wrists. Not to escape, to align them. That's when one of the officers whispered that his skin felt cold. Not dead cold. Stored cold. Like something that had been kept somewhere dark for a long time. We ran his name in the system. Nothing came back. That should have been the end of it. But then we checked a secondary database. Military contractor records. That's when the tone in the room changed. The name was flagged. Not read, not restricted. Just buried. No address. No next of kin. No active status. Marked as deceased. 6 years prior. Cause of death. Undisclosed. I asked him directly. "According to this, you're dead." He nodded. Once. I asked him where he had been. He looked past me. Not at the wall. Past it. And said, "They stopped asking questions before I stopped responding to them." That line never made it into any report. As we escorted him out, something else became clear. He didn't look around, didn't examine the house, didn't react to the open space. It was as if he already knew the layout, not because he had been there before, but because he had been trained to memorize spaces without seeing them. Outside, he paused. For the first time, he tilted his head slightly and said, "The lighting is different here." One of the officers asked what he meant. He answered, "Here, people notice when I don't behave correctly." That's when we received the call. Not from dispatch, not from a supervisor. From a secure line none of us recognized. We were instructed to transfer custody, leave the property, and submit no further statements. When we asked where he was being taken, the voice said, "You were not the intended recovery team." Before they took him, I asked one final question. I shouldn't have. But I did. What were they testing you for? He looked at me, this time directly, and for the first time, his expression changed. Not fear, not anger, understanding. "To see how much of a person you can remove," he said, "before the body starts compensating." Then he added, "And how long it takes for others to stop noticing." That was the last time I saw him. 2 days later, the report was recalled. A week later, rewritten. A month later, erased. What stayed with me wasn't the house, or the missing room, or the lights. It was the certainty that he was not an escapee. He was a result. And someone, somewhere, still wanted him back. Nothing happened to us afterward. That part is important. No nightmares. No hallucinations. No strange symptoms. Just interviews. They separated us the next morning. Different buildings. Different people. Same questions. They didn't ask what we saw. They asked how we described it. Not what the man looked like, Swart, but which words we used. They asked if any of us had written anything down before submitting the report. They asked if we remembered what we almost included. Every interview ended the same way. A reminder. No non-disclosure forms. No threats. Just a statement repeated until it felt heavier than paper. This incident did not involve a crime. One of the officers mentioned something they hadn't written anywhere. Something small. Something that didn't seem important at the time. While we were escorting the man outside as the military vehicle approached, he had been whispering, not to us, to himself. At first, the officer thought it was counting. Numbers, maybe. But it wasn't consistent. There were pauses, corrections, as if he was rehearsing something that kept changing. Later, after thinking about it for weeks, the officer realized what it was. The man was reciting procedures, not words meant to be understood. Instructions. Don't correct posture unless prompted. Maintain eye contact only when addressed. Silence is preferable to approximation. None of that was in the report. None of it was supposed to be remembered. I didn't understand what he was until much later. Not that night. Not during the interviews. Months later. I was going through old training materials for a completely unrelated case. Declassified documents, behavioral research summaries, human performance studies. That's when it clicked. He wasn't designed to infiltrate. He wasn't designed to escape. He wasn't designed to fight. He was designed to remain present. To exist in environments where normal human responses would interfere. Fear, pain, confusion. They didn't remove his humanity. They trained around it, until the body stopped relying on it. That's why he didn't react. That's why he didn't panic. That's why he corrected his own restraints. He wasn't broken. He was finished. The final confirmation came from him, indirectly. Before they took him away, after the vehicle arrived, one of the officers said something they shouldn't have. "You don't have to go with them." The man looked at the officer, then at the vehicle, then back again. "I'm not being moved," he said. "I'm being returned." The officer asked where. The man thought about it, longer than he had thought about anything else. To wherever they're still trying to make it permanent. That was the last thing he said out loud. As the vehicle door closed, he leaned forward slightly and spoke again. Quiet, almost polite. "If I start reacting," he said, "it means the next version failed." No one responded. The house was demolished 6 months later, officially for safety reasons. No further reports. No follow-up. Sometimes I think about that night, not because of the house, not because of the missing room. Because of how calm he was, because of how sure he seemed that what was done to him was not an exception. Just a step. And the reason this report was buried wasn't because of what we found. It was because he wasn't the last.
I didn't take the job because I wanted adventure. I took it because I was running out of options. 2 months earlier, I'd been laid off from a warehouse job I'd had for almost 6 years. No warning, no explanation, just downsizing. Savings disappear faster than you think they will. Rent doesn't care that you're trying. I sold my car first, then most of my furniture. By the time I saw the listing for the property job, I was calculating how many weeks I could stretch canned food. The posting was simple. Night property watch, remote location, 2 weeks. Cash payment at completion. The amount was enough to reset everything: rent, debt, time. There was no company name, just a number and instructions to call between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. When I called, the man who answered sounded calm, professional, detached. "You'll be alone," he said. "That's fine. You won't need to patrol. Just remain inside from 8 p.m. to sunrise." I asked what I'd be watching for. Nothing specific. That should have bothered me more than it did. The property was deep into the mountains. 3 hours of highway, then an hour of narrow road, then gravel. No neighbors, no visible power lines. The house ran on generator and battery backup. It wasn't abandoned. That's what surprised me. It was clean. Stocked kitchen, working plumbing, fresh sheets. Like someone had prepared it carefully, but didn't intend to stay. The first night felt almost peaceful. After weeks of cramped apartment walls and traffic noise, the silence felt expensive, heavy, complete. I locked the doors at 10 p.m., checked the windows twice, sat on the couch and watched the camera feeds, mostly out of boredom. Nothing moved, not even trees. Around midnight, I made coffee, walked the hallway, listened. There's a kind of silence you get in deep mountain areas that feels different from suburban quiet. It's not absence, it's pressure. Like something is waiting for sound to return. I slept during the day, cooked simple meals at night. Got into a routine by the second evening. Lock, check, sit, watch. The second night I noticed how far the tree line was from the house. During the day it looked distant. At night it felt closer. The floodlights covered most of the clearing, but the edge of the woods stayed black, completely black, like light didn't want to enter it. I kept telling myself it was just isolation playing tricks on me. When you're alone long enough, your brain starts inventing company. By the third night, I had almost convinced myself this was the easiest money I'd ever make. No phone calls, no interruptions. Just me, the generator hum, and 6 camera feeds. At 1:58 a.m., the generator dipped for half a second. Not off, just a brief drop in sound, then normal again. I checked the fuel. Full. The camera screens didn't flicker, but something about the timing bothered me. Not enough to scare me, just enough to remember it. At 2:13 a.m., I happened to glance at the clock, only because I was bored. Nothing happened. No sound, no movement. I laughed at myself. There was no reason to memorize that time. No reason to expect anything. It was just another quiet mountain night. I didn't realize yet that the first few nights are always quiet. By the 4th night, I stopped checking the rule sheet. I knew it by memory. Lock the doors, fuel the generator, do not leave after 2:13 a.m. That last rule still felt unnecessary. Nothing happened at 2:13. Nothing happened at 3. Nothing happened at all. The days were simple. I slept until late afternoon, cooked whatever was left in the cabinets, walked the perimeter before sunset. The clearing around the house was wider than I expected, almost perfectly circular, like the trees had been cut back intentionally. Beyond that circle, the forest was dense, tightly packed trunks, no visible path. It wasn't natural spacing. It looked controlled. On the 5th night, I found something small. Not threatening, just strange. There were new scratches on the outside of the back door. Not deep, not claw marks. More like something hard had dragged across the surface. Horizontal lines, about waist height. I ran my fingers over them. Fresh wood dust. They weren't there the previous evening, I was certain of that. I checked the camera covering the back clearing. Nothing unusual. No animals. No dropped branches. No recorded movement. The feed log showed uninterrupted footage. That bothered me more than if I had seen something. If something had come close enough to scratch the door, it should have triggered motion detection. It didn't. I convinced myself it was debris blown by wind, even though there hadn't been wind. That night, I kept the shotgun nearby, not because I felt in danger, just because I didn't want to feel unprepared. Around 12:30 a.m., I noticed something else. Camera 2, facing the left side of the clearing, had a faint distortion. Not static, more like heat shimmer, as if the air in one specific spot was bending slightly. I leaned closer to the screen. The distortion wasn't random. It had shape. Vertical. Narrow. Too consistent to be glitch. I tapped the side of the monitor. The image stabilized. Perfectly clear. Nothing there. I told myself the system probably wasn't new. Cheap wiring, cheap cameras. Remote jobs cut corners. At 1:47 a.m., I heard the first sound that didn't belong. A dull, single thud. Not at the door, not at a window. Somewhere along the side of the house. I muted the television, listened. Silence. I checked all 6 camera feeds. Nothing. The clearing empty, the trees unmoving, the black beyond the floodlights still thick and complete. I waited 5 minutes. Nothing else happened. I even stepped into the hallway and listened at the walls. No scratching, no movement, just the hum of the generator. I went back to the couch, told myself the house was settling. Wood shifts in temperature, old beams expand. I'd heard worse noises in apartments with shared plumbing. But I didn't sit all the way back down. I stayed leaning forward, watching. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the generator dipped again, this time longer. The lights dimmed, the screens flickered. All 6 camera feeds glitched at once. For just under 2 seconds, every screen showed static, not the usual gray snow, darker, thicker, like something passing too close to the lens. Then everything returned. Lights stable, generator normal, cameras clear. I stared at camera 4, the one covering the front clearing. The dirt near the porch looked slightly disturbed, like someone had walked through it. But there were no footprints, just uneven texture. I checked the timestamp, 2:13:07 a.m. The first thought that felt like fear crept in. Not panic, not yet. Just that quiet tightening in your chest when something stops being coincidence. I stood up, walked to the front window, didn't open it, just looked through the glass. The floodlights illuminated the clearing. Empty, still. The forest line was a solid black wall. I felt watched. That's the simplest way to put it. Not because I saw anything, because the silence had changed. It felt closer. I stepped back from the window, locked it again, even though it was already locked. Sat down, kept the shotgun on the table beside me. Nothing else happened that night. No thuds, no distortions, no scratches. But I didn't laugh at 2:13 anymore. The 6th night, I stopped telling myself it was wildlife. The 6th night felt different before it even started. Not because anything had happened, because I was waiting for it to. I checked the doors earlier than usual, checked the windows twice, walked the inside perimeter of the house slowly, like I was memorizing it. Living room, hallway, 2 bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen. The house wasn't large. If something got inside, there wouldn't be many places to hide. That thought stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. I fueled the generator before sunset, topped it off more than necessary. I didn't want another dip at 2:13. I didn't want excuses. The sky went dark quickly in the mountains. One moment blue, the next swallowed. The floodlights clicked on automatically. That wide circular clearing lit up again, and beyond it, the same wall of black. At 11:36 p.m., camera 5 caught movement. Not a distortion, not shimmer, actual movement. Something stepped just barely into the edge of the floodlight's reach, then stopped. I leaned closer. It wasn't fully visible, just a vertical outline, too thin, too straight. It didn't sway like a branch, didn't crouch like an animal. It stood. I waited for it to step forward. It didn't. It stayed exactly where the light faded into dark, like it understood the boundary. I switched cameras. Front clearing, nothing. Back slope, nothing. Left side, nothing. When I returned to camera 5, the outline was gone. I checked the timestamp. It had stood there for 32 seconds without moving. I told myself it could have been a tree trunk, even though I knew the trees didn't stand in the clearing. Around 12:20 a.m., I heard something scrape along the outside wall. Slow, not clawing, dragging. From the back corner of the house toward the kitchen window. I froze, didn't move toward the sound, didn't look immediately, just listened. The scrape stopped, then silence. I forced myself to check the camera covering that side. Empty. No movement, no shadows. My pulse was louder than the generator. At 1:03 a.m., camera 3 went dark. Not static, black. I stood up immediately, checked the monitor cables. Nothing loose. The other 5 feeds were normal. Only camera 3, the one facing the thickest part of the tree line, was offline. I considered stepping outside just to look at the wiring,
just to confirm it wasn't damaged. The time on the clock read 1:09 a.m., plenty of time before 2:13. I walked to the front door, hand on the lock, and stopped. I remembered the way that outline had stood exactly at the edge of light, not crossing, not retreating, waiting. I stepped back from the door. If something wanted me outside, it wouldn't need to break in. It would just wait for me to open it. At 1:58 a.m., the generator dipped again, longer than before. The lights dimmed noticeably. The living room felt smaller in that half-dark. I stared at the clock. 2:12. All 6 camera feeds flickered at once, even the one that had been black. For a split second, they all showed the same image. Not their usual angles, not the clearing. The same frame, as if every camera was pointed at the same spot. A tall shape centered, closer than before, too close to the lens. So close, the image warped around it. Then everything snapped back. Each camera returned to its proper angle, the clearing empty, the forest untouched. The clock read 2:13 a.m. I didn't breathe for several seconds. I replayed the footage. Nothing. The system hadn't recorded the shared frame. It skipped from 2:12:59 to 2:13:03. 4 missing seconds. That was the first moment I truly felt alone in a way that wasn't peaceful. Not just physically alone, but isolated from explanation. I didn't sleep the next day, not fully. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that shared frame, the way it had filled the screen, too tall for the camera height, too narrow to be human. That afternoon, I walked the clearing again, slowly, carefully. Near the edge of the floodlight's reach, I found something new. The dirt had been pressed down in a long, narrow indentation. Not like footprints, more like something heavy had leaned there, balanced. There were no toe marks, no heel shapes, just depth and distance between impressions that didn't match any normal stride. I crouched beside one of them, placed my hand inside. It was larger than my forearm. I stood up slowly, looked at the tree line. For a moment I thought I saw movement again, but it could have been my eyes adjusting. That evening I loaded the shotgun properly, checked every window, moved a chair under the front doorknob, not because I thought a person would try it, because I wasn't sure what would. By the 7th night, I stopped convincing myself it was equipment failure. And for the first time, I started to wonder how many nights the previous watcher had lasted.
The first knock wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound carried through the dead generator silence like something tapping bone. 3 measured hits, evenly spaced. I didn't answer. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. Another knock, harder. This time the wood flexed, not splintering, testing. The rule came back to me. If it gets inside, don't run. The third impact wasn't a knock. It was weight, full weight. Something slammed against the front door with enough force to rattle the hinges. The chair I had wedged under the knob shifted an inch. I chambered around. The sound felt small compared to what was outside. Another slam. This time the wood cracked, not fully through, but deep. I could hear the fibers splitting. It wasn't scratching. It wasn't clawing. It was hitting the door like a battering ram, deliberate, precise, backing up between strikes. I stepped backwards slowly, keeping the shotgun trained at the door. The house felt thinner than before, like the walls had lost weight. The fourth hit broke through, not a full breach, but a fracture near the handle. I saw something push through the splintered gap. Not a hand, not quite. Long, jointed wrong. Too many angles. I fired. The blast deafened the room. The recoil shoved me backward. The shape withdrew instantly. A sound followed. Not a scream, not an animal cry. A low, vibrating exhale. Like something annoyed more than injured. Silence. I didn't move, didn't reload, just listened. Then I heard it move, not away, along the wall. The boards outside creaking under heavy steps. It wasn't retreating. It was circling. The back door. I ran, not outside, through the hallway, into the kitchen. Locked the back door again, even though it was already locked. The first strike hit the back door seconds later, harder than the front. The entire frame shuddered, plaster cracked along the edges. I realized something then. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. It wasn't testing. It was trying to get in. Another impact. The wood split down the center. I could see a sliver of darkness through the crack. Something pressed against it from the other side. The smell hit next. Rotting, wet, metallic. I fired through the crack. The blast tore the door wider. Something jerked back violently. A heavy thud followed. For half a second I thought it might be over. That maybe it could be hurt. That maybe it would leave. Then the sound changed. Not pounding, not slamming. Climbing. I heard weight on the roof. Slow, deliberate steps above me. Boards groaning. Shingles shifting. It had stopped trying the doors. I backed into the living room, the shotgun shaking slightly in my hands. I tried the satellite phone. No signal. The screen flickered, then died. Something scraped across the roof directly above me, then stopped. I looked up, and that was when the ceiling bowed inward slightly, not breaking, just bending, as if something was crouched there, right above me. The drywall cracked, a thin line running across the center of the room, dust falling. I took one step back, then another. The crack widened, and a long, pale limb punched through the ceiling, not falling, reaching. I fired upward. The blast shredded drywall. The limb withdrew instantly. A heavy crash followed above, something shifting its weight violently. Then silence again. I stood frozen in the debris, waiting, listening. Minutes passed. No movement, no breathing, no steps. And then I heard something worse than any impact. My own voice from the hallway behind me. Soft, calm. Don't run. The voice behind me didn't repeat itself. It didn't need to, because it sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same breathing pattern, same hesitation. Don't run. I didn't turn around. If it had learned my voice, it had learned my movements too. I backed toward the kitchen slowly, keeping the shotgun aimed down the hallway. The floor creaked under my weight. Behind me, the same creak echoed. Not perfectly. A fraction of a second delayed. It was copying. Not mimicking words, mimicking position. I stepped left. A second later, I heard something step left in the dark. Too heavy, too slow. The rule came back to me. If it gets inside, don't run. Running would give it distance to close. It was longer than me, faster across open ground. I had to shrink the space. I moved into the kitchen, turned on the gas stove manually. The flame ignited. Blue light filled the room faintly, just enough to see shapes. The hallway behind me remained dark, but I could see something at its edge, too tall for the doorway, bent slightly to fit. It didn't rush me. That was the worst part. It leaned its head sideways, watching, studying. The proportions were worse up close. Arms hanging nearly to its shins, shoulders narrow, ribcage visible under stretched skin, and the face, no details, just tension, like skin pulled too tight over something that didn't belong. I grabbed the kitchen chair and threw it toward the hallway, hard. It shattered against the wall. The creature flinched, not from fear, from calculation. It adjusted its posture slightly, like it had just learned how chairs move. That's when I understood. It wasn't just copying. It was updating. I grabbed the propane tank near the stove, twisted the valve open slightly. Gas hissed into the air. The creature stepped forward, slowly, almost curious. I backed toward the living room again, toward the broken front door. I needed it between me and the kitchen, needed space, needed flame. It moved into the kitchen fully now, long limbs folding awkwardly around corners. One hand braced against the ceiling where it had torn through. The smell intensified, rotting metal, wet bone. I fired again, point blank. The blast tore through its torso. Something dark sprayed against the cabinets. It recoiled, but didn't fall. Instead, it lunged, not fast, but covering distance in unnatural strides. I dove sideways. Its arm hit the wall where my head had been. Plaster exploded, wood splintered. Pain tore through my shoulder as I hit the floor. The shotgun slid out of reach. It turned its head slowly, studying me on the ground, adjusting angle. That's when I rolled toward the stove, grabbed the lighter from the counter. It reached for me, long fingers stretching, joints bending wrong. I sparked the lighter and dropped it toward the gas line. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. Flame burst outward. The kitchen ignited. Heat slammed into both of us. The creature reacted instantly, not screaming, not roaring, just retreating violently. It slammed backward through the hallway wall, not through the doorway, through the drywall. Wood snapped, framing cracked. I didn't wait. I grabbed the shotgun, ran, not toward the back door, toward the front breach it had already made. The clearing was lit by burning light behind me, the house beginning to catch. I ran straight into the open field, not toward the trees, toward the gravel drive. Behind me, something moved, not in pursuit, circling, keeping distance from flame. I didn't look back again, not until I reached the truck.
The engine turned on the third attempt. My hands were shaking too badly to keep the keys steady. As I drove away, the house burned, flames swallowing the roof, smoke rising into the black sky. For 1 second, just one, I saw something tall standing beyond the floodlight radius, watching the fire, not advancing, not retreating. Then the trees swallowed it. I drove until sunrise, didn't stop, didn't check mirrors, didn't breathe normally until I hit the highway. The next day I tried calling the number that had hired me. Disconnected. The listing was gone. No cached page, no saved screenshot, like it had never existed. I drove back 3 days later, in daylight, with 2 friends. There was no house. Not burned ruins, not debris, not foundation. Just clearing. Perfectly circular. Trees intact. Ground undisturbed. No scorch marks. No broken wood. No tire tracks. Nothing. One of my friends asked if I was sure about the location. I was. The gravel drive was still there. The road signs were still there. But the property, gone. There was one thing left, near the edge of the clearing in the dirt. An indentation, long, narrow, deeper than any footprint. I didn't step inside it. I haven't taken a night job since. I don't stay anywhere remote. I don't sleep near tree lines. And every night at 2:13 a.m., I wake up without knowing why.